So like driving through our hometown at night, going to a house party. And
you're like, I remember this.
Yeah,
feeling.
and I was like, I felt like I was doing something wrong, you know?
Yeah,
and
skulking around a little bit, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It took me a moment to place it where I was like, why am I feeling so like?
Because every time you did this in the past, you were on the verge of getting arrested.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 481 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is August 16th, 22 by 4.
Oh, yes, August.
I'm just reading what's on the page.
I mean, that is how you say it.
Yeah.
August.
Yeah, it's a good thing we don't record on Wednesday, you know?
Yeah.
So Friday's a better day. Also, before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity on this show, so enjoy. It's going to be great. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help keep the pod juices flowing. Delicious.
Should we call it a notice instead of a warning or an alert?
A buzz.
I mean,
because a warning is like, oh, you better watch out. But a notification is just like, FYI.
Just FYI.
I've never really figured out who it's for.
It's just one of those, like, it's best
It's just
things because
it's a cover your ass kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You know? So I don't know.
We could also just stop warning people and, and hope for the best.
That's my vote.
Option.
We should warn people at the end. Hey, just so you know, you heard a lot of profanity in this episode.
If you need,
so I hope that was okay.
If you need a therapist, here's some people you can contact.
Sponsored by BetterHelp.
There you go. Yeah, maybe if we put our profanity warning at the end, we can get a sponsor from them.
Yeah, if we cause some
drive some business
psychological distress, then we can market. This is actually just how modern business works anyways. You find that pain point. So our pain point, we create the pain point. Because that's really what you do anyway now. Because we're talking about like in mobile games where you're like, ooh, I want this person to get just mad enough. It's like, fine, I'll buy this fucking thing, right? It's the same deal. We just make you mad enough from all the profanity that we start to degrade your mental health, and then we
make bank.
Then we make bank.
Oh, yeah. Finally, we found a way to monetize this podcast.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
It's been an interesting week. We are just barreling down production of Crashlands 2. We are wrapping all kinds of things up. We are making big moves. Things are coming together in all kinds of really cool ways, which we will not spoil any of it. But just know that we are psyched about how it's all shaping up. So instead of talking about all that stuff, because we're kind of in that mode of dev where everything we say is a spoiler or way too technical, we're just going to talk about some stuff that's been going on in life and kind of how that relates to, everything else. And then if we got time, we'll take maybe a third of a question. So,
That's how it works.
So big news in the B-Scotch world is that Adam had his 20th high school reunion this past weekend.
Big news from mostly an age, kind of perspective, because 20 years, that's a long time. That's just
don't seem right.
So long. I haven't gone to any of my high school reunions, but a few of the friends that I've kept in at least some touch with since high school, we're kind of all gonna be there, and they're scattered across the four winds these days, And so I was like, and it's a 5-hour drive from here, and so
which is right on the cusp of being too long, but it's not too long.
Yeah, but it's not quite too long, So I was like, I really think I should go. Just do it. Just do it.
When else is that collection of people gonna be?
Yeah.
Proximal again. Yeah.
And I was pretty anxious about all of the other people who I have not talked to in 100,000 years.
I remember.
Yeah. And some of them I was like more or less friends with in high school, and so, but we haven't talked since, so it's like, will I recognize them? How weird is it going to be?
Well, and for context, like our high school graduating classes were around like 100 and
mine was
people.
Mine was a little bigger than usual. It was like 140, 160 or something. But it's not a lot,
It's not like for most of those people, were there from the beginning. They went to kindergarten with or whatever, right?
Yeah, so almost all of them.
Yeah, so it's like 150-ish people that you kind of saw for 12 years.
Yeah.
You know?
Just all of school, basically.
Yeah. But while your brain was still made of goo. So
Yeah. Well, and so that's a lot of it too, right? It's like who I was as a person at that point, with a lot of like not understanding why I was felt like I didn't fit in, so socially anxious, trying to hide it all the time and all that, which, you know, now
spiky hair.
Now in retrospect, was a lot of that was the autism, but of course a lot of it too was just like being an adolescent trying to navigate the world, right?
Yeah, it's hard to find any adolescent who feels like they fit in.
Yeah.
In general,
it is, and then it gets harder if you've got other stuff going on, you know. So kind of it was interesting to kind of come back to that and kind of think about talking to all these people again, but in this brand new context where we're basically all completely different people at this point.
Yeah, you don't really know these. You know where they came from.
Strangers, but with a nice shared history.
There's like something back there. Yeah. And so that also makes it kind of an interesting cross section of people, because it's, you know, people that are now these days doing all kinds of stuff. It's not right now. My bubble of people I know is like in the video games and web tech and like adjacent kind of industries, you know, in terms of like what people are up to. So it just kind of gives us more. It's just like this cross section where we have something in common to start as a base point, but then can just, you know, kind of talk. I guess
way to frame it is like you all have a shared backstory, but a different story, right? And when you're young, you don't think that your current life is a backstory. Yeah. But it kind of is, you know. It's like your origin story.
Yep, and it will be, And so it ended up being surprisingly chill. And I went and I just went full. I haven't had to turn on my like
extrovert mode.
My extrovert mode in quite some time. Like I have to when we have gone to like conventions and stuff in the past, but for the most part, there aren't really things that I have to do anymore where I have to like go and like don the full mask, you know, of I'm an extrovert. Like I'm carefully thinking through.
I'm in a crowd and I'm happy to be.
And I went into the whole weekend just being like, this is what I'm doing. I'll just be wearing that mask and I'll be whatever people are up to. I'll be doing those things. If we're staying up late, we're staying up late. You know, usually if like the clock's starting to get close to 10 p.m., I'm trying to figure out how to get home, you know? But this time I was
which isn't to say that it's not fun or enjoyable. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And for me, it's, you know, it's a fully kind of conscious effort across all dimensions. But I just kind of went in just being like, this is what it is. And it ended up being just fucking chill. I got caught up with a whole bunch of people, some of whom I wasn't even close to at all, or was in some cases afraid of, like back in the day, you know, and
probably with reason.
Yeah, in some cases. But in all cases, it was just totally chill and fine, and everyone's normal. People got interesting stuff going on, and it ended up being a surprisingly good time.
It's an interesting arc. Did you find some, you know, some of those connection points with people that were just surprising for you, given that you have such a temporal gap here, right? Like 20 years.
Yeah, I think
a lot of people.
I think it just felt so distant that none of it could really be surprising, you know, in the sense of like in essence, I was just meeting people for the first time, right? Who just like kind of looked familiar and who I knew.
A little more comfortable, basically.
Yeah, and who I knew some stories about, you know. Some of them I was actually in as a kid, but like I don't remember the experience, you know. So yeah, it ended up just being really chill and pretty fun, and hearing what everybody was up to. It's something that we always say, like almost everything can be interesting if the people involved are interested in it, you know?
Yes.
And I was pleasantly surprised to find that most people, no matter what they were doing, are like into what they're doing. So they were like,
thank God,
ready to talk about it.
It's nothing's worse than if you like try to talk to me like, hey, so like, what do you do? You got any hobbies? And they're just like, oh, it's boring. I don't want to talk about it. Like, what?
Yep.
Why?
What are we doing?
I want to talk about it. Yeah. Tell me about your life.
Yeah. And there was one interesting shared experience across the people. So anybody that I talked to who was like working for a big company of any kind. But I'm normally thinking about, you know, the tech and games space, and what we all know is it's a fucking shit show, and especially the past couple of years, it always has been, but it's just getting worse and worse. And I talked to people who were like working at big agriculture companies, people working at big like finance companies, like just all these different sectors. And the story was the fucking same across the board, which was like, I used to enjoy my job, and then it became really corporate once some new people took over. And now I'm trying to figure out how to get laid off, or I got laid off and I'm trying to find a new job, right? One of the two.
It's the enshittification of everything.
And that was just the case. Literally, everybody who worked for a big company that I talked to, that was the shared. It's a universal experience apparently right now in the United States.
There was nobody who's like, I'm rising up the ranks of this large corporation, and it's pretty great. I love it.
None of that.
No, none of that.
Just it was just like I used to like what I was doing and feel like I was in a good environment for it, and now it's just garbage.
No bueno.
Yeah. So
the bigger the machine, the smaller your cog is, right?
Yeah, but I think we're
less
just
impactful. It feels.
It's just that late stage capitalism stuff. That's like it's so clearly where we are, and I just normally think of it in tech and games. Where
and in kind of more abstracted terms, because it's there's like you always see articles like 10,000 more people laid off at this company and at this company, and it's all like numbers, but like this time you're just like chatting with people.
Yeah. So that wasn't a good thing, but it was interesting just to hear like, oh yeah, this is we're all doing really different stuff. Came to what we're doing in lots of different ways, but the common thing is that everything around us is crumbling, but despite that, everybody was like, for the most part, finding a path forward and trying to make it all work, which, is what we're all doing. We're all basically like looking around being like, why is it like this? And then just doing our best,
whatever.
Just deal with it.
Did you find were there any points where you had any conversations with people where you had like anything that you remembered from, say, it doesn't even be high school, but childhood essentially that then like gets a reframe after you talk to someone about it, or like
there was. So the people that I was like anxious to talk to, so the thing that I noticed is that these are essentially people that I don't know, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have any, and the ones that made me the most anxious were the people who I was like just nervous around because like they were cooler than me or whatever,
Which in high school, being cooler than people just means being really standoffish and not engaging with
it can
people.
mean all kinds of things, but that is what I'm doing. And of course, like it's been 20 years, we're different people, et cetera. But I noticed I was like intellectually, I was very actually like consciously aware of the fact that like it's going to be just as weird for those people to talk to me, like they're actual, like, because when I was a kid, like it was hard to like really think of other people like just as other people,
who also have their own shit
who also got their own shit going on.
Yeah.
And now it's just a lot easier to do that. And so I had this kind of interesting conflict where I knew that these people were just people and that we were basically meeting at the same point. And also a whole bunch of people said out loud that they were very anxious coming to this thing. Right. So
of course.
Yeah. To their credit too, because that's also the thing that like back when we were in high school, you would never say that out loud,
that ain't cool.
No, because
not in the 90s.
Not cool. Yeah. And that actually was really helpful. Just like everybody was just like, yeah, we're all kind of like, this is weird. We're not really sure how to think about this. And kind of going through that same dynamic where it was like for a lot of people, some people were traumatized by some of the other people that were there, that long ago. And the worst case scenarios, but even in the fine case scenarios, they just like didn't know each other and were kind of awkward around each other 20 years ago. Right. And I noticed that I was like, for a few people that I talked to, I was like really struggling to not just kind of carry that awkwardness forward, despite fully intellectually knowing that like there's no reason for that, because all of the reasons why it was awkward a million years ago don't exist. They're all gone, but there was like that little bit that was just still there. And the other kind of like very related weird thing was, back in high school, most of the stuff that you're doing to try to, especially if you live out in the country, there's nothing to do, is like either, and also you're a kid, so you don't have any rights, so like either you're in trouble because you're doing something you're not supposed to according to your parents, or you're doing something illegal like drinking underage, right? Which I don't recommend. Nobody should be doing that. But like, so at the end of the like the main event, it was like 11 p.m. We were going to go to somebody else's house for a little bit, just with a smaller group, just to kind of hang out. So I was just driving over there with a couple people in my car. I'm fully sober because I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to do any drunk driving, No. So I had a beer like, 4 hours prior or whatever, because I knew I needed to drive. And So like I'm fully stone sober. It's only 11 p.m. Driving my car, but I'm driving my car with like an old high school buddy, and then one of the plus ones, in the back. So like driving through our hometown at night, going to a house party. And
you're like, I remember this.
Yeah,
feeling.
and I was like, I felt like I was doing something wrong,
Yeah,
and
skulking around a little bit,
And it was, and it took
Watch
me
out for cops.
Yeah, exactly. It took me a moment to place it, where I was like, why am I feeling so like? Why do I feel like something is?
Because every time you did this in the past, you were on the verge of getting arrested,
or just you're out too late now, or just whatever. And that was something that I like. Once I had recognized that, then I could actually pretty easily, kind of consciously overcome that. But it was an unexpected kind of a thing
there's a certain strangeness to like once you become an adult, realizing the range of things that you actually can do that nobody gives a fuck about.
Yeah.
That would have been a huge, even for example, like if I wanted to, I could today go buy a whole ass cake from the grocery store, and I could bring it home. And then tomorrow morning, I could just eat it for breakfast.
Yeah. Which is something that I do in my adult.
And, I will be filled with regret.
Yep.
But I'm allowed to do it, and nobody gets to stop me from doing something like that. So, they're like, there's like a million things when you're a kid that every time you turn around, somebody's telling you that you can't do stuff.
Yeah.
Or they're just looking at you disappointed, disappointed face. Yeah.
And it does make sense that like going back into the context where that was your whole life, every moment of every day back then was like that.
Yeah. It's all.
And so if you go back to that space with those same people, then like.
Well, so then after this, like, I'm curious, like after you had some of these conversations then with people where you have that, like, the past trying to keep you in the past in some ways, did you have any of them where it actually like stopped, as in you got comfortable with the person?
Well, actually, that was the interesting I think my experience, I think overall was pretty different from a lot of people's there, because I have such bad long-term memory. So it's one of those, like, I read a paper on this kind of newly coined term for a phenomenon that people are just starting to study. So who knows if it's real, or what it is, but it at least accurately reflects my experience, which they called severely deficient autobiographical memory, right? Was the term for it. And it just like, it's sort of like when I discovered I had aphantasia, and I was like, all of a sudden somebody listed some stuff, and I was like, oh, that is my experience, right? It was the same kind of a deal. And it just is the case that like I factually remember stuff from, and not that much,
like in list form.
Yeah, there's just like there's a handful of like things I know happened and like in events and stuff. But that was kind of what was really interesting about this trip too, is that with with the main group that I was hanging out with the most, like the guys that I wanted to go see. We were kind of we're trying to do some like reminiscing and stuff, and they were all reminiscing a lot. And like I had zero emotional connection to any of it, and didn't even remember most of it. Right?
So you're learning stuff about what happened in the past.
Yeah,
basically.
and
like,
so
you were there, but you were also like a recipient of the storytelling, because it's like you were hearing about these things for the first time.
Exactly. Which is and what I've learned over my whole life, because this has always been true, is that what I always need to do in those situations is just kind of, for the most part, act as if I remember, because people get offended if you don't, even though it's just like how my brain works,
Yeah, how are you going to control that?
Yeah, so a lot of it is like trying to figure out how to like play that game properly. But it was really interesting because we went out, and at one of my friend's house, kind of lives out in the country, and we used to go out and like walk on the railroad tracks, like that goes through his property, and that's where we used to have our totally reasonable, not illegal at all parties and stuff, over at his house.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And we
back by the railroad tracks. That's where you have totally legal parts.
That's where you go when what you're doing is totally fine and it doesn't matter. People
totally reasonable.
Yep.
And so we kind of went like before we went to the main event. We were like, hey, let's go kind of recreate that little experience,
fun.
And so we drove out. It's the middle of the day, and we drove out in a pickup and walked down the tracks. Had a beer on the way because just like kind of just reliving that experience. And the whole time I was like, none of this is even remotely familiar.
You don't remember? You don't remember it?
I know we did it. Like, I know we did it. And I remember some of the stories and like,
That's so interesting.
right? But like, we were like looking
Like
off
visually, like as you're walking, you're like, I don't remember the specific.
Yeah, visually
things. Gotcha.
nothing, which makes sense too, because I can't visualize things. It's got to all be connected, But like, but visually nothing, and no emotional connection to any of it. And it's like, well, we get to this point like down the tracks, we're like, this is the place. This is where we used to like come
where it all happened
to hide, whatever. And like everybody else like appears to be like.
Yeah, and you're like, was it though?
Yeah, and I'm like, this just looks like a random patch of land, and so a lot. So that was so then when it came to the main event, and we're catching up with people, there were like we had some of those anchors of like stories that we could kind of use in common, but because I don't remember them really, certainly not experientially at all. I remember some of the factual things, and so I actually didn't have enough to hook onto to like use reminiscence as a way to sort of have a conversation. So I just but that also gave me an advantage because there was just like kind of nothing anchoring, like when I would go talk to a person, there was nothing like anchoring who that person was today.
Yeah. You get to be a little
You
less.
get to be like a dog. You just get to live in the moment.
Yeah.
Just,
Forget the past.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
It's the past.
And so it ended up being like a few of the people I talked to were people I basically never talked to in any significant way in high school, and had just really good, interesting conversations with.
Wonderful.
Because and you could kind of see it too. Like it was the people who were at this event were already kind of like, it was a small subset of the small group of people, and it was kind of divided into these like somewhat overlapping, friend groups that also existed back then, but also because some people are still local and so they know each other better and stuff. And so you can kind of see like it still kind of did that, where it's like people are kind of largely talking to who they know. But since I've kind of felt like I didn't really know, just none of that, none of that did anything, and like, or none of that like anchored in my brain, because I did like work to remember like who were the groups of people that hung out with each other, like it wasn't just built in any way. And so that actually made it a lot easier to just go up and talk to people.
So what's funny about this is you're like, people will get upset if you don't remember, right? But on the flip side, you get this advantage where because you don't remember, you don't even know who is expecting you to talk to them. And so you would just go like have a conversation with somebody, and then they would go home and be like, wow, like I've never really talked to Adam before in my whole life much. And it was great. Like it's so nice that he took the time to like come and chat with me. And you're over there like, I don't know who these people are.
Well, that was like, I recognized almost everybody. Like there was something about them where I was like, oh yeah, this is like a person that I have some familiarity with, but it's one of those like, for me, it's a recognition of familiarity more than it is anything else, So, so it was like, I knew just enough that like, it wasn't like cause like to me, it's basically impossible to go talk to a actual rando, like someone who I don't have any way to place in any way, shape or form. I just can't, cause I'm just like, I don't even know how to think about any of that, and so this is like that next step above where it's like, because there's a familiarity there.
It's easier to be comfortable, I feel like.
It's just, like it kind of removes a lot of that activation energy. And but then also the other thing too is that because everything's in that shared context, and people I didn't recognize, mostly I didn't want to make the faux pas being like, oh, the shit, this was actually somebody I knew, because like plus ones were there. Right. And so
that throws a wrench in things for sure.
Yeah. So I was trying to like accurately guess, I was like, oh shit, and in the end, I just fell back on the fact like it's been 20 years and we all know it.
Yeah. That's fine.
And
all of our brains are deteriorating.
Yeah, we also
over time.
So I would just preemptively be like, like, oh hey, I'm not sure if we know each other. And
you just kick off. You have a conversation with, hey, I have a terrible memory.
Yeah, exactly. Which
forgive me
is true. And it just ended up being fun. Had some just very interesting conversations. So
everybody's there in the same position, right? Like to varying degrees. Like not everybody's going to have the memory issues that you have, but everybody's going to have some amount of things that they're just like, I don't remember who that.
Well, and I think that's the main thing is for something like this, just the fact that it's been so. I've now spent more of my life since then, right? Because that was, 20 years ago, and you graduate when you're 18, roughly, right? So so more of my life has happened since then, right? And that's also true for everybody else. And so, yeah, I think that fact makes it so that, and again, I think this is also interesting too, because like I've never gone to one of these reunions because I'm like, well, I just, I don't really know these people. Why would I go do it, right? And I think this is the first time that I did something like this when I was like, actually, it was just kind of interesting and fun.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Because I didn't know these people,
but
knew them just enough or had something in common, And so, and it kind of reminded me even of just like going to GDC and stuff where it's like,
Yeah, you just catch up with people who you kind of know a little bit.
Yeah, and many who you don't, but at least you got it's the familiarity part, right? You'll see somebody wearing a T-shirt of like a game that you've seen or know about, right? So
now, the only downside
familiarity
of a high school reunion is that there's not people from trying to sell you advertising SDKs.
I know.
At your,
if we could kind of bring that at this high school reunion,
if we could bring that experience in, then I feel like it would really.
I should have proposed some sponsorship opportunities. Maybe get some NFTs in there.
Yeah, and half of your classmates are trying to tell you about the new VR game that they're working on. We really got to recreate the GDC experience.
Well, I think what's interesting though, as far as like how you're talking about what made it easier in some ways to talk to people. To me, there's a fun takeaway here as far as like a useful socializing tool, which is to basically you approach people with that same kind of sense of familiarity, even though you don't know them. It's like in any context.
Which is exactly what I did. I was just like, as if we were friends in high school, and even if we weren't, and as if we've known each other the whole time. That level of like, hey, how's it going? Good to see you.
And that puts them on the back foot because then they're like, wait, do I know this? They might not know you, but if you're talking to them like you know them, then they're the one who's like, wait, am I supposed to know?
Well, it's really about putting people on the back foot. It's more like because it makes people
I'm just fucking around.
Yeah, it makes people comfortable typically to like to actually just chill.
And it was funny because there were a few. There was one interaction in particular with somebody who like we weren't enemies or anything, but we just didn't really know each other, who I just came over, started chatting with her while I was like looking for a beer, and she seemed surprised when I started just like, hey, how's ejecting positivity everywhere.
Put it on. Yep.
But within like 15 seconds, then all of a sudden she was just like in it, and now she was like telling me wild stories and like the whole thing, and it was just, and again, it was like that reminder. It was like everyone here is not really sure what to do. They're all a little anxious and it just like weirded out by the whole thing.
Honestly, just be interested in people, and it opens the door.
And it's fun.
The reality is like everybody in any one of these, whether it's a high school reunion, conference, just a random on the street, like everybody wants to feel a sense of familiarity with like the people around them. Actually, like a sort of not a closeness, but there's an ease of that.
Well, people want to be seen. Right? Like we've all been in that situation where like you go to an event and there'll be like groups of people standing in circles because that's what ends up happening, right?
You're chatting,
and you come in and you're like, how do I get in there, right?
Yep.
And like
you
whenever I'm in one of those circles, if I see somebody drift into the circle, I immediately talk to them.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. Like to open it up and bring them into the conversation.
That's also a good socializing hack. If you're like me, if you struggle just to like talk to people in the first place, is that dynamic of being like, actually, you're the person who right now obviously is uncomfortable. There's an obvious thing that is the right thing to do here, which is to loop them in. There's a mechanism to do it, which is to say, oh, hey, I just thanks for jumping in the circle. Like I'm X. You're what's your name? What are you up to? Whatever. Right. Like there's a script basically that like immediately comes to mind. They're going to be happy for it every time. Nobody's going to think that was weird that you did that. Right. And so it actually
everybody's waiting to be in into
exactly.
So
it's actually it is a really good hack for like you just like practicing interacting with people and making people like start off with that kind of positive interaction, because like definitely a lot of the people I've ended up talking to over time are those people, the ones who like I was like in a circle that was kind of like growing, and as people came in, I would like finish a thought and say hello,
open the door,
and then those are the people who like then after the little group disbanded would like come up and talk further, you know, like, and it is like finding those mechanisms to like get past.
People are grateful for you helping them get past the weird, like feeling like they have to force themselves into a conversation.
Yeah. But it's like, if you're that person though, like you're like, there's already some circle and you're trying to get into it. That's
it's the worst. I hate
that
it.
is the worst one. I hate that so much.
Yeah, I could approach a person, just cold, like any moment of the day, but cracking into a circle that is
diving
already
into
doing
an
something.
existing convo.
Yeah.
You
And
always
even-
feel like a rude asshole.
Yeah,
you know?
but even when you know, because there's also the two different kinds of circles, right? There's the one where like a bunch of people who know each other, and of course that one that's impenetrable, and that's a faux pas.
But you don't know.
You don't know for sure. But even when
That's
you
the
do
problem.
know for sure, it's not that, because it's like you just like a talk just ended in like the
Yeah,
speakers.
you're like, we're all randos here. Basically.
Yeah, like even when you know everybody's a rando, it feels the same. It feels like you're
Yeah.
interrupting and not allowed to be there. So that is still like the one scenario where I'm like, that's my ultimate nemesis when it comes to
I
social
will say though, the one downside of getting very good at that skill, the whole like making people feel familiar more or less instantly, is that people will tell you stuff within minutes that they seem to have been wanting to get off their chest for a while, and you're like,
wasn't prepared for
I
this.
was like, well, I'm glad you feel comfortable sharing it with me, but I feel like I'm holding your secrets now, and that's odd.
Oh, I'm great at secrets because I forget them.
Same here.
immediately.
I'm just like not a threat, I guess. People
Yeah,
are
you
like,
tell
here's
me
my
anything.
secrets. I'm like, all right.
Oh, it
My
is.
mind isn't a steel trap. It's more like a leaky sieve, like it just stuff comes in and it's just gone.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
all good.
What is it? It's disarming, right? When you, and I know like I try to do the same. I try to approach like all my interactions with our business partners and stuff the same way, which is just like, I'm just going to be a person. And part of my goal is to make them feel like that I care what's going on their side of the puzzle,
Yeah.
And it is true. Like you very quickly, people just start telling you stuff. Just
Yeah, people get very candid when they feel like somebody's actually listening to them.
and it's also it's easy to trigger because like I just tell them stuff that I probably shouldn't be telling them, But you kind of like you judge it carefully and you're like, is it really risky, and it turns out like if it's a game that I had gotten good at over the years.
You're always very good. When we go to GDC and stuff, Adam's like,
I hate
up
do.
for
It's not even that I
5
hate
days.
do. It's that I'm so anxious and stressed the whole time while I'm doing it. Because I'm very conscious the whole time of like what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and it like just makes me so stressed. So I can especially as you'll see like at GDCs and stuff. If I start getting tired, I'm just like. There's like nothing happening. I'm just kind of like starting to wander off into corners,
Clutching your whiskey like Gollum with
exactly.
the ring.
Yeah. But like it's something that I've gotten like pretty decent at, but I just hadn't had an opportunity for years now to like go turn it all the way on.
yeah.
And,
Pandemic.
I'm
really
glad it was good.
yeah. So it was surprisingly fun.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
So if anybody's got your high school reunion coming up, maybe think about going. I mean, it's interesting.
It
if
is
nothing
interesting.
else.
Yeah.
The longer it's been, the more interesting it is.
Oh, yeah.
To be
Yeah. I
honest.
think I would have hated like a 5 or 10 year reunion.
5 years out.
5 is nothing.
10 was great.
I went to my 10.
10 I
Like,
can
it's-
see maybe,
It
but
was
like,
interesting. Yeah.
I feel like the 10 year would have been a problem for me though, because I already would have forgotten everything because my memory does not go back. But for everybody else, it would still be a
Expectations
little
higher.
too fresh. Yeah. I think
Yep.
having not seen any of those people for literally 20 years put me in a really good position to match my reality, of like, they don't really remember either. It's like the stories they're telling it's now the handful of like really retread stories.
And therefore embellished.
Yeah, likely embellished. And at this point, like in the earlier days, like when we were still in college and like I would still kind of keep in more touch with people and stuff, I could watch the stories become embellished because I still remember just enough
the details.
that I would like hear the new add-on. I'd be like, I don't think that's right.
Push it a little bit.
Yeah, so now when I hear these stories, I'm like, okay, I know, and especially from a certain few key individuals who I just know, where I'm like, if they give me a number, I should half it because that's the more likely number, and yeah, so I think it makes it all a little easier when it's just been a long time. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a pretty interesting experience over the past 6 or 7 weeks. So I had mentioned that I've been doing a lot more like exercising and getting to the gym more and stuff. In conjunction with that, I've been doing a lot of tracking. So I've always tracked my like weight and reps and workouts and stuff because that's just real, right? Like how many pounds did you bench press and how many sets and reps, right? And like I like doing that because I get bored pretty easily of just like doing the same shit over. Like I just can't go for a run because it's like I'm just running the same thing every day. But with lifting, it's like, you can break up your workouts and like today you're doing this set of things and the next week you're doing this, or the next day you're doing this group of things, and you can kind of compare week over week how well you're doing.
There's a fun little like organizational mini game basically happening in the background.
Yeah, it's like you got like 3 dozen different little leaderboards for yourself that you can compete with yourself on, which is super cool. But I was like, well, I want to just like try to just get in better physical shape in terms of like, I want to look a little bit better, maybe like trim out some body fat, lean up, etc. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, I mean, we all know that comes from diet, right? Like you just can't really exercise your way into.
Well, we don't all know that because there are certain segments of the industry that are constantly trying to tell you that you just got to exercise more.
Yeah, there's always some kind of secret, but it's like just don't eat as much. And I always use like the dog test, which is like if your dog was overweight, what would you do?
Yeah, you just feed him less.
Feed them less, and then they lose weight, right? And they're not happy about it, but that's what it works because nobody's body violates the laws of thermodynamics, right? Like nobody's creating matter from nothing. It's got to come from somewhere. So I started doing some like calorie tracking. There's this app called Lose It, which has like a huge archive of food in it. And also you could just like scan a barcode. Nice. So if you're like, I'm about to eat this, like eat some goldfish crackers, and scan the barcode and it's like, and it just puts it right into the app, and then you can adjust the servings. But then it's got, how many carbs, protein, sodium, fiber, fats.
So is that
macros?
Maybe this is for a later part of the discussion, but I'm just like thinking about like, because I actually used that a while ago. And something that I noticed that it did to me was that it made me start to favor packaged goods.
It does.
Yeah, because it was so much easier to scan.
Yeah. So we'll get into that. Okay. So start doing that, and you can, you tell it like what's your age, what's your gender, what's your height, your weight, blah, blah, blah. And then it'll tell it what your goal is. For me, I was like, okay, I'll try to like lose a pound a week for the next 6 weeks or whatever. And so it gives you a calorie target, a calorie budget. And as long as you come in under that budget, then in theory, you'll be losing some weight. So I started tracking that, and I just did that for a while. And I learned like, we used to talk about DevOps. It's all about making the work visible. Whatever you can see, that's what you can actually act on. If you can't see stuff, then you don't know what's going on, and therefore you can't decide. So for starters, I learned a lot about fiber and sodium that I didn't realize. Namely,
I assume it's that you get too little of the former and too much of the latter. Is that the
even though I eat almost exclusively vegan, and if not, then vegetarian, which means plants, which is where the fiber is. Even with that, I was getting like 1/3 of the amount of fiber that is recommended.
You're supposed to get like 27 grams a day or something.
It's a lot. And
that's a lot more than you.
And especially as you get older, that fiber becomes just so much more important.
It's pretty important.
Yeah.
So I started making a bunch of adjustments to my diet to try to like find things that were still like high in protein and like had the other stuff that I needed, but also had fiber, right? Mm. And there's all kinds of weird things that can backfire. Like celery has a lot of fiber in it. If you eat a lot of celery, it doesn't really matter that it has the fiber because it also just kind of makes you shit a lot. Right. So like there's a lot of things that even though like on the label, it's like, oh, this has what I need. Like it also has other stuff in it too, because it's food full of other things. And so you can't just make a decision of what to eat based on one metric. Like you got to think about how it's going to affect your
this is your KPI problem.
Everything else. Yeah. It's your KPI problem.
Yeah. You kind of want everything to be balanced, but like maybe be biased towards something, So it's like you got it's like when I buy bread, I always buy like the highest fiber bread I can get. Because then it's like it's still bread end of the day, right? But it's the high fiber one, so like that's how just like add a little extra,
some fiber out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was kind of interesting to kind of seeing like it's really easy to overshoot on sodium by like a huge amount because everything packaged, an easy way to preserve food and make it taste better at the same time is to just cram it full of salt, right? So that's something that I found pretty difficult to like come in under the budget on sodium. But ultimately then it's like I kind of did all this stuff and I was making all these adjustments and I was watching my weight and I was also exercising at the same time. And this is where things I think fly off the rails for a lot of people. Although it's easier to burn fat than it is to build muscle in terms of like gaining a pound of muscle is a lot harder than losing a pound of fat.
Well, yeah, because you can eat less which is just not doing something, right? To get rid of some fat. But the only thing you can do to get muscle is exercise, which is doing a bunch of
exercise
work.
And consume protein. Yeah. Which means you need calories to build the muscle, which then can interfere with your attempts to lose fat, right? So you got to be really careful about like trying to eat lots of high protein foods, but not lots of food in general, right? So I think the trap that a lot of people fall in when they do this kind of stuff is they fixate on their weight. So they're just like, I want to lose 5 pounds. Well, if you're doing a lot of things right, if you're exercising, you're got a calorie budget and you're eating a lot of protein, et cetera, then in many cases, as your body adjusts to that routine, your weight will do weird shit. Like for me, like I lost like 4 pounds in a week and a half, and then I gained 3 pounds in 3 days. Because, for example, your muscles retain a lot of water as you exercise a lot. And water weighs a pound per pint. It's fucking heavy. It's really heavy, right? And so that can be like very difficult. So even if you're weighing yourself at the same time,
I was going to say, you got to have a lot of noise.
Same part of your routine.
There's noise in the measurements, and
there's a lot of noise.
Yeah, over a single
the amount
day.
that people are trying to lose or gain, right? Like the amount that you're trying. If you're like, I'm going to lose 5 pounds, it's like, well, I mean, if you weigh like,
but I even had, for example, I had a medical procedure that caused my foot to swell. That made me gain a pound.
Yeah,
fluid retention
because of the fluid, and it's not that much fluid, but it's distributed out over a large area, right? Like in like my whole lower leg, and so there's all these little things that I think if people get really fixated on like day-to-day numbers, they'll get really discouraged, right? So the other thing I was looking at is I was like, all right, well, it's not really about weight. Because if I was like, I want to lose 5 pounds, and somebody was like, well, I could like get rid of 5 pounds of bone, I'd be like, no, I need that. I don't have that many pounds of bone to begin with.
5 pounds of brain?
5 pounds of brain? That's your whole brain.
Whole brain. Yep.
Yeah. And so like a pound is not a pound. And so if your goal is to quote lose weight, that's such a weird metric because it has nothing really to do with what you're trying to actually achieve. It's like
you're
very
saying,
bad
you're saying
proxy.
You need to be more specific about it.
You need to be thinking about body fat. Now, the problem with body fat is you can't fucking measure it. So I had a scale that I've had for quite a long time. That's when I was like, oh yeah, like you stand on it and it puts like an electrical current through and it tells you your body fat. But it was super unreliable. It would give me just like random numbers, basically. Like, oh, one day I'm 25% body fat, and the next day I'm 9. That's just a random number, right?
Because there's a lot of other things that do impedance for electricity and mess up that calculation. How much water did you have? Are you well rested? Is there other stuff going on? Is your foot swelled up? The foot that's attached to the scale when you're shooting electricity through it. Yeah.
How many calciums you got?
Yeah. So I was like, all right, I need a better scale that can actually like do this stuff. So I went and I found like the best reviewed one that I could find that has like a thing that you like hold on to. So you have like, it's got like electrodes for your hands and for your feet and blah, blah, blah. Still the same. Completely random numbers, right? So it's like, all right, so you can't measure the thing that you care about the most. The thing you can measure doesn't fucking mean anything, which is your weight, right? But then also for calorie tracking, the more I looked into it, the more I learned like, just as a pound is not a pound, a calorie is not a calorie.
So how could it be? You know?
Yeah, like if all you eat is carbs, then that's like gonna have a very different effect on your ability to get in shape versus, you know, if you have a more targeted thing, or even like when do you eat? Does it matter? There's a lot of debate about it. It's hard to tell whether that matters. And on top of that, I've learned all kinds of stuff about how like calories, like companies rig their nutrition facts in all kinds of ways to underreport stuff. So like if you look at Tic Tacs are just made of sugar, but on the label, they say they have 0 sugar in them. And the reason is that each Tic Tac is just small enough that it's under a threshold that they're allowed to round it down.
Is the serving size 1 Tic Tac?
Serving size is 1 Tic Tac. And so on the nutrition facts for Tic Tacs, it says that it has 0 of everything. 0, no, it doesn't have calories, doesn't have sugar, doesn't have anything in it, except it does. It's just made of sugar, right?
It's also it's the same reason why all serving sizes that are because the nutrition label is mostly like per serving. And if you just define the serving size to be just really smaller than like what a person would actually eat, right? Which is historically people used to do.
Or make them confusing. Like a goldfish crackers, you know what the serving size is?
Is it like 13 goldfish or something?
55 pieces.
That's a lot.
I memeasured it out. It's a half a cup. But they don't say half a cup. They say 55 pieces because if you grab a handful of goldfish crackers, how many pieces is that? It's already hard to tell volumes, right? But then like 55 pieces, what the fuck?
Yeah, they want you to feel like it's a lot, right? So that way when you're as you're eating, because like you don't really eat one goldfish cracker. That's not how that works, you know. So that as you're eating, you can just feel like, oh, it doesn't really matter. They're basically each individual one is nothing. You know, they're basically free.
Yeah, and of course they, you know, it's also kind of tricky because they can't be like a serving size is 1 handful, right? Because it's like, well, you know,
people got different hands.
I mean, it is technically what a serving size of goldfish crackers is realistically, but you can't measure that.
It's not, and it's not like we're weirdos who measure things in like feet or, you know, other bizarro metrics designed not for human body parts. So then kind of the final, so essentially like my journey was like, I started tracking all this stuff and I had a lot of benefits from it because of the mindfulness aspect because you're paying attention, like
paying attention. Yeah.
You're paying attention.
Yeah. What I had heard years ago when I was like paying attention to some of the stuff. So I don't know how backed it is, but I think this makes sense that one of the most successful interventions you can make if you're trying to manage your health with the parts of your health related to your diet is just a food journal. Not even to do anything with it. Like not to be
just
like,
write it down.
Just write it down. And that's it. Because by writing it down, it like adds this extra step where now you have to like take a beat and like document the stuff that you did. But also you can look at it and be like, because like you eat a lot more than you think. Everybody does, right? Because we're snacking throughout the day, blah, blah, blah. And that intervention alone helps like a huge fraction of people improve with their health goals related to food intake.
I learned that like the average American consumes 3,600 calories a day.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is dramatically higher than the amount you should be eating to maintain a stable weight, right? Which is also why we have,
but also
so
probably right? Because there's not actually a universal thing, and that whole thing is a mess too. Because even if you were accurately computing, like how many calories you're eating, all that kind of stuff. No two people have the same metabolic needs, and no one person day to day has the same metabolic needs.
Because like Sam was saying, like how much did you sleep last night? That's going to affect what you need to do.
And a calorie is a calorie, right? So like,
Yeah. If you just like dunk your hand into a jar of peanut butter, and you're like, there's my 2,000 calories for the day. It's like, well, that's not going to work out too great for you. In most respects.
I mean, it might be great right now, though, because
it's fucking delicious, though.
Sounds like, but that also will work out better than just doing the same, but with raw sugar. Same number of calories, but So like,
so I think
so. You started basically on this like, I want to get some visibility. Okay, as you dig deeper, you're getting more visibility, but it turns out that there's what you're seeing is just getting more confusing. It's a fractal problem, right? As you dive deeper, it just gets deeper. And you're like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this now?
Yeah, so things kind of came to a head when I was like, okay, I've been tracking my exercise. I've been tracking my diet. Now I'm going to track my sleep. The last bastion of untracked things in my health journey, right? So I got a sleep tracker thing. I started looking at it and I was like, this is random. This is telling me random stuff. And it also was making my sleep worse because it's kind of the opposite problem of eating, where like, if you're really paying attention to your eating, then you gain control over it. With sleeping, the whole point of sleeping is to not use your brain. That's what you're supposed to be doing when you're supposed to turn your brain off and not be thinking about shit while you're sleeping. If you are now being hyper vigilant about how you're sleeping, when you're sleeping, whether you're falling asleep on time, whether you're about to have a good night of sleep, blah, blah, blah. At least for me personally, it was like I only tracked my sleep for 6 days. Good. And I felt the worst during those 6 days than I had for a long fucking time.
It's funny. I don't know. There's a host of psych studies that have shown that they basically put quote unquote sleep trackers on people and then just told them that they either had a good night of sleep or a bad night of sleep.
Then
and people felt accordingly to a degree, right? Like, if you have like a real shitty night of sleep and then someone says you have like, oh, you slept really well, it doesn't quite make up for it. But if you're like if you lose a few, but someone's like, oh, you actually slept really well, according to this statistics, people sort of like, oh, okay. And then you have that boost for the rest of your day, which is hilarious, and vice versa. Yeah. You can have a great sleep and then someone's like, you slept like shit last night. And you're like, oh, and then you start putting this narrative together. So there's a lot of,
it's as you start paying it. Yeah, as I start paying attention to it, because I know from coming back from my trip over the weekend, I was like, okay, I talked to lots of random people, and a lot of them came from all over the place, right? So like, it's a disease zone. So I was like, I'm gonna get something probably, So I'm like trying to keep track. 'Cause I also don't want to get my wife sick, and so I'm like trying to monitor my own symptoms to things, right? And like starting like the day after I got home, I just had like a little bit of a throat thing, right? I also been talking way more than usual, so could be that.
Could be that,
Yep. And I was also really tired, but also I just like stayed up later than usual by a wide margin. Spent a whole bunch of time socializing, way more than usual, et cetera, et cetera. So there are all these reasons why that didn't have to be illness. But as the days have gone on, each day I'm like really hyper aware of like what my throat's doing. So each day I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I don't think I noticed anything besides just normal like morning grossness, And as the day wears on, it sort of shifts into something where I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that's like the verge of an illness.
Yeah, right.
But is it though? Or am I just really paying attention to how my throat feels right now, right? Which is like the same idea as this, like, if you wake up in the morning, you're not really thinking about whether you're that tired or not, right? And then you look at the thing that says like, oh, you slept like shit, by the way. Now you start trying to interrogate yourself.
Or like, even worse is if you feel like shit, but the thing is like, wow, you had a great night of sleep. And you're like, so should I just power through even though I feel like shit? Because like it says that I slept good. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does this make you feel like nothing is real though? Like at the end of the day. So what do you pull out of this?
Well, I think for me, it comes down to this. It actually reminded me a lot of that book about chaos when they talked about measuring the weather, where they were like, we can't predict the weather. We can give rough guesses about what's about to happen, like within the next hour.
Yeah, as you get
very
closer in time.
Yeah,
becomes more
and why can't you do that? Well, it's because everything affects everything. And so if you've got instruments that measure humidity and wind and air pressure and stuff like that, and let's say you've got those spaced out every mile in a grid wrapping around the entire planet, right? Well, for starters, those instruments are affecting the weather because now they're everywhere and they are creating perturbances and they're doing stuff to the air, right? So already you're changing things in tiny ways that are hard to predict, but also there's a huge amount of space between each instrument.
Yeah.
That is not being measured.
More importantly,
and above, et cetera, right? And so you get this weird thing where what you're measuring is like a really loose proxy that gives you a glimpse into probabilities about what's going on.
Yeah,
but it's not true. It's not 100% accurate, right?
Yeah, but also
that's kind of what I felt.
Any one instrument too is going to be calibrated differently than the other and have a different capacity to have the numbers it reports accurately reflect reality around it, right?
Yeah. And they're all going to have different biases and things like that. And so what I kind of found was like, and this is what I kind of recommend for if somebody is wanting to go down this journey of, wanting to get healthier, exercise more, blah, blah, blah. Especially the nutrition tracking part of it, it does do one thing super well, which is it helps you build a mental model of what it means to eat well.
Yeah.
Your calories and everything else are not going to be exact. If you're like, oh, I'm 7 calories under my budget today.
It's kind of like the weather in that regard, right? It's not that you may not be perfect at predicting exactly what's happening, but certainly by having some of these measurements in place, you can get a useful kind of a model of how things are like, right?
Yeah.
Can you model this and you can use it?
Yeah. You got to focus on big picture because that's the best it can give you is a kind of estimate of the aggregate thing that's going on with wide error. So even then the best it can give you is over time. It can give you like a trend in big picture kind of understanding of what's going on. But
Yeah,
any
so much like-
one measurement though is basically bullshit.
Yeah, so I'd say to me it's kind of like it's actually weather. I feel like is a good example because there's been so many times where I will walk outside and I'll say to Sampy, "I think it's about to rain," and she'll go, "Well, it's not in the forecast," and I'll be like, "It really feels like it's going to rain though," and then it rains, right? Because it's like it's something that I tuned into where like I can read how my body is feeling the air, right? And I know what it feels like before rain comes, just like how the air feels on my skin and the humidity and stuff like that, right? And so in the same way, like if you collect this data and kind of like just keep a journal, lose it and like track your calories or something like that, just to give yourself visibility. And if you kind of correlate that against like, how am I feeling, right? Like if I do cut out a bunch of sodium over the next 2 weeks, which I now know that I'm doing because I saw how much sodium I was eating and I switched some foods on purpose, right? How do I feel now? And for me, that actually was the biggest reinforcement thing because it let me draw connections between like how things I was eating was affecting how I was feeling, right? And how much I was eating was affecting how I was feeling. And it made me update my habits and update a bunch of things about my diet in a way that's pretty sticky and will last for quite a while. And I don't need to just keep tracking forever, right? Yeah. It's like it's a way to build a mental model for how to make adjustments.
Yeah,
that's a good way to think about it.
And that in itself is very challenging too, right? Because especially when it comes to, we've all been trained our whole lives to sort of create a disconnection between how we feel physically and emotionally versus what's happening and what we're doing. Because necessarily those are like
power through it.
Yeah, well, they've been disconnected because it's like you just have to be doing certain things, So it's like you have to eat this because that's what's available for school lunch, or whatever, and you have to finish all the food on your plate even if you're not hungry. So ignore your hunger cues, Like
a person does not have perfect control of everything that's happening, but you do have to do stuff. So,
but especially and in that formative time when we should have been learning how to like understand the signals our bodies are giving off, was the time when we had no control over it whatsoever. And so we all learned basically a disconnect between those things. And it's something that I've also explored in more recent years of like trying to actually pay attention to like, am I hungry? And as I'm eating, like, am I not hungry anymore? Like,
why am I eating this? Am I just bored? Or?
Yeah. And it's actually surprisingly hard to like actually identify the point at which you go from being like hungry to not hungry to full to too full, right? Is you have to like either you have to already have a pretty good connection to that you've managed to not get erased somehow in childhood, right? Or you have to figure out how to like really redevelop it, and it's a challenge to like actually know how you feel is a huge challenge.
Yeah, but it's so I feel like it's really under discussed in a weird way. Like anybody who's had a pet knows that if your pet is having issues and you take your pet to the vet, the first thing they ask is
what are you eating?
How's their diet?
Yep.
Are they eating normally? Blah, 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 right? It's all about like what's going in and what's coming out. That's always the first conversation, right? But if you go to a human doctor, it gets weirdly like thrown into the mix with all kinds of other stuff when I feel like paying attention to what's going in and what's coming out, like that's in many cases, your first and your last stop, like.
I think to Adam's point, though, I think that, so like the word for that in psych is interoception, which is like the ability to feel what's happening inside of your body. And that can relate to your emotional state as well. Not necessarily just your physical state, but the reality is like it is a skill you can develop more so.
Yeah.
Right?
And also depending on the kind of brain you have, it might be easier or harder. Right.
Well, and a lot of people who have a very high anxiety have been shown to have extra high interoception. They have a sense of their own heartbeat moment to moment, way more than like a standard person. You could
so they make feedback loops for themselves, like, oh, my heart rate's up, and then they get anxious about it, and then they go.
And there's a sense like stuff like irritable bowel syndrome and stuff like that. A lot of these things that have more of an emotional connection to them oftentimes are present in people who have better, what you call better interoception, like in terms of they can sense more. But I think one of the things you think about is like whether you need to tune it up or down, right? I think being able to take a moment and just recognize where you're at with stuff is kind of whether it's with food or whatever else, like, am I hungry? And being able to like answer that question.
And the whole time also understanding too that like, you know, depending on how your brain works, how your body works, the answers to those questions can be more or less hard, like to figure out, and like your ability to learn that can be hard.
More or less accurate too.
Yeah, and also exactly that's the other part that's really important is more or less accurate, because like a lot of people who struggle their whole lives with like weight and stuff, right, is because they have like a hormonal thing going on that makes them literally hungry all the time, whether they're full or not. They're just hungry all the time, right? And so it's already hard because it's already like try to understand yourself. But then we add in that next layer, which is like, but also yourself might be lying to you and really.
Yeah, I understand myself, and I'm not very happy about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So
myself is not doing me favors.
Yeah, but I do like how this is all a metaphor for just how challenging it is to measure and know anything. Because the whole point of all this is like the KPI here that like most people just think about is like calories or weight on the scale, right? And the point that like it doesn't take much thinking at all to very quickly recognize that like both of those are dog shit metrics, right? They're
very noisy.
They're really not good, and and it's so easy to go down the wrong path by focusing on those metrics.
Oh yeah, like I'll never forget in high school seeing the wrestlers in the lunchroom just sitting there in a group not eating or drinking anything, right?
Because
like, well, why did they do that? Because it turns out losing weight is simple. If you just literally stop consuming anything at all,
water,
you're going to lose a lot of weight real fast, right?
Yep.
You will be in bad shape in so many other ways.
Yeah, not easy.
But hey, if your goal is pounds come off and that's your only KPI, then that's a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, or as you said,
you're not measuring the things that really matter.
Yeah, or take some of your bones out or whatever. You know, like there's ways to get there. But I think that's true.
Chop a leg off. Bam. There's like 15 pounds, 20 pounds, 30 pounds. I don't know how many pounds. How pounds does the leg weigh?
I don't know. Probably a lot.
But that's a good weight loss technique.
Yeah, just cut it off. Yeah, but I think that's that point though. Is like no matter what you're doing, it's something like, and this is where it gets kind of like, I don't know. I think it's kind of like funny in a sort of macabre kind of a way, because like our own human fucking bodies, right? We're people. We're the things that have the bodies, right? Mm-hmm. And we've been around the whole time that science existed, because you know we did that. Mm-hmm. And like you would think that we would have like easy ways to be able to be like, yeah, what does it mean to understand what's coming in and out of your body, for example, right? Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to know how something feels? What does it mean to measure this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that we still can't, right? For things about about reality, about the real world that exists that we are participating in, I think about ourselves, right? And then you want to go off and say like, okay, I'm trying to make my business succeed. How do I go measure how my employees are doing, right?
You don't even know how much food you're eating.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know fucking anything, even for the things that matter the most.
You've got blind spots in your vision,
and have always been there. Yeah. So, which is like, to me, this is stuff that like back when I was in grad school, like became like very clear as I was trying to measure stuff. And then as I was trying to measure stuff, being like, well, how do we know anything? And then like going to look into more things, being like, oh, I guess we kind of don't, right? We're doing our best, and they're like, our metrics can be useful if you're interpreting.
Yes, I think that's the trick, right?
But there's so much nuance.
But it's about usefulness, right?
Yeah, it's about usefulness. But they all get misused, right? But I think to me there was a freedom in that I gained of once I kind of recognized that, like, okay, yeah, it's like everything is actually just way more complicated than that. Then it allows you to kind of move to the simpler things. So like the idea of like a food journal.
Everything's so complicated that it's actually simple.
It becomes
the only move you really have to make is the simple one, which is basically like keep a food journal, ask myself how do I feel, right, and try to like focus on that. And again, all those are still,
and try to eat stuff that isn't, full of shit that you don't need.
Yeah.
Right.
And simple doesn't mean easy, right? It means like conceptually straightforward, because all these things are still,
it doesn't have a lot of steps to it.
Yeah. And like, but just the idea that these like the KPIs are almost universally for anything, or they're bullshit in a particular way. Like if you actually use them for things they can be used for, which is always a narrow segment of things, then like they can be useful. But any usage beyond that point, and you're just chasing numbers.
If you're only focused, like if you actually are only using the KPI, but not in the service of a broader thing that could not possibly be measured, right?
And without having some nuanced understanding of the connection between those two.
Yeah, because for example, like the joke with the business stuff is everyone's like, we're going to increase our revenue by $2 million this quarter. And it's like, well, I mean, that's weird KPI to choose for a wide variety of reasons. But like, if you're going to be using that as your KPI, what is like a higher level goal that is essentially
that connects
abstracted
that to
enough?
the actual work. Yeah.
Yes. Why? Why does this
Why
matter?
are you doing
and then,
that?
Because if you don't have the bigger one that you can't nail down with all the kind of slicing and dicing of metrics, then I think you just run the risk of like just losing the plot 100%.
Yeah. Well, you need the why to have a reason for that KPI in the first place, right? But then the most important thing though is connecting it to what actually happens, because like so is the joke that you hear in so many companies where they have these like revenue-based KPIs, right? Is they just put the KPI out. And there's no discussion of like, here's how the parts of the company function together to like result in like this value moving up or down. Therefore, we need to focus our efforts on doing blah, blah, blah within those parts of the system so that we actually get that outcome, right? It's just the same thing with like when people are like, oh, I need to lose 10 pounds on the scale, right? It's the same concept where you just like, you just pick a number out of a hat, disconnected from your actual activities and how they impact that, or whether it even makes sense in the first place. And then just like start going for that KPI.
Yeah. Why? Why do you feel like you need to lose? What are you really going for here? Right.
Answer
that question.
You always got to keep them
optimize
both
for
in
that.
mind while you're doing these things. Otherwise, you lose them.
Because the fact is, like you may weigh, like for me, I weigh in like the mid 170s, right? There are people who weigh what I weigh and they look so much fitter than me, and there are people who weigh what I weigh and don't look as fit as me. Yeah. It's not about that, right? And also, like, there's people who weigh what I weigh and they can run a marathon. I can barely run 8 feet without getting winded, right? Because my cardio is terrible. So what does it mean?
Not a particularly strong indicator.
Doesn't mean anything.
Cardiovascular health.
Yeah. So like, I want to be healthy. I want to be able to get around without like, be getting super sweaty because every move I make is exhausting, right? Like a scale doesn't measure that. Your own, like Sam was saying, your own body, you got to be able to interrogate and feel your own body and know what you need, right? And that just takes time of like logging stuff and keeping an eye on things. So it's been an interesting journey. It was worth doing, but yeah, I wanted to talk about this because I feel like a lot of people
everyone
go down
tries
this
to do
path.
stuff at some point, whether it's health or
Yeah,
we've done this.
There's so many pitfalls that you can.
Yeah, we've done this with our games and other stuff too, where it's like we'll try to measure everything to be like, okay, if we measure everything, then maybe we can figure out what's going on. Inevitably, every time we do that, like we might find a few things. Sometimes we're lucky and we find a few things. We're like, oh, actually, I think maybe this told us something, right? But almost universally, even when we think a thing might be telling us something, as we think through it, we're like, but here are all the reasons why that might not be what it's telling us. Yes. To the point where at some point we're just like,
do we want to do it or not? Because that's kind of
it's just to not do it actually, and instead like have somebody play the game and watch them play it. Like because it's the same idea as like now we're actually looking at what we really care about, which is like what is the player experience as far as we can tell. And if you're trying to do that by like these abstract KPIs that measure a single concept and are really separated from the thing you actually care about, you can't get it.
It goes to show like anytime a studio really starts focusing on those metrics and trying to use them as a driver of design, they make garbage.
They always do. Yeah.
Every time. Games only get worse when you design them for the numbers and not for the experience, because the numbers are a proxy for the experience. They are not the experience, right? Yeah. So I think it's probably a good place to leave it. That's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help it boost the game's visibility and help it have a successful launch, and we'd appreciate it tremendously. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.